So I come from the Gulf of Mexico office, and I don't know how many folks are familiar with that office, but we're located at Stennis Space Center, kind of in between Biloxi and New Orleans. And we have 14 people on our staff. So it kind of precludes us to have a lot of partnerships to get things done in the Gulf of Mexico, unlike some of the bigger water body programs like Great Lakes and Chesapeake. And one thing I like to throw out there too, and Nancy, this is for you too, is I don't know how many folks know this, but the hypoxic zone is bigger than the Chesapeake Bay. So that just gives you the scale of what we're working with compared to Chesapeake. Now, my office, I'm married, a lot of our folks are married, but we're still seeking relationships, but in a more professional manner. We're looking for basically projects that can help pollution in the Gulf of Mexico that also show results. And that's tough. We talk about that in 2 or 3 year time frame to get results, or we call outcomes at EPA, right? It's just very, very difficult, and it's very challenging, I know, for the professors that work for the research institutions. A lot of our funds at the Gulf of Mexico program are for studies, but also we're charged with having environmental measures, like we said earlier, that have to show results. So how do we take those studies that researchers want to do, and how do we combine that with results that the community needs or meet, say, Tampa Bay Estuary Program's master plan, and get a project that within 2 or 3 years we get results that we can also report back to our leadership and ultimately goes back to Congress to justify our funding. And we get a lot of RFP proposals that struggle with that concept. We usually have 3 or 4 that rise to the top pretty quickly, but a lot of them, they're very well written studies and they have great science behind them, but they just don't have that measurable component of success that we can use to show our measures. And that's something that I think we all need to strive to do. So some of the measures that we have to report include things like number of acres of treatment wetlands created, or number of wetlands restored or rebuilt. How many water bodies are no longer impaired? And we have really good luck with some of our partners that we fund in getting water bodies off of the impaired water bodies list. And they use a method, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit. Anyway, but there's some of the other, one of the ones that I think that a lot of researchers can use is this decision makers who use the data SAS tool. So if you're developing a model or you're developing a tool to remove pollution in the environment, especially in the urban environment, do we allow enough time in those projects to get that number? How many people actually use that model to make that decision that actually protected the urban environment from pollution? And we just mentioned a little bit about the social science issues. So what are some of the proven methods that will change attitudes in a community? How can we bring those to the table and then show ultimately that the community made the change within the project timeline? And in an Environmental Protection Agency, we do have a big initiative on environmental justice issues and working with tribes, Vietnamese communities in the Gulf Coast, Latin American communities in the Gulf Coast. And how do we take some of those urban populations and bring them back to the coastal environment so they ultimately value it in a way that they won't ultimately pollute it, just like everyone else in the city. And also, when I think about Carrie St. Pei, who may be retiring soon, down at the Barataria Terrebonne National Estuary Program, and his Trash-Free Waters program that actually tries to enable people to make the right decision to not pollute their waterways, get rid of their trash in the right way. So some of the big issues that we're dealing with and trying to fund projects on, one of the biggest ones, urban stormwater. And of course, we heard today several times about the rapid growth in the coastal environment. But now with climate change, so you may make a stormwater decision in your city and how to get rid of that water out of the city in an efficient way without also polluting your river and ultimately your bay. But with climate change in 50 to 100 years, and we saw that the timeline on some of that infrastructure may last into 100 years, do we have the infrastructure in the right place to move a lot of water, or now have we overbuilt because we don't have the same rain that we used to have in that location? course, combined sewer overflows. We looked at RFP proposals recently, and I was really surprised. I didn't understand this. I thought it was some of the big city issues like Atlanta, but also like stuff like zoos, have combined sewer overflows. And I didn't realize that until some of the proposals we got this time, and that they're dealing with trying to make that difference in a zoo to get rid of the water in an efficient way, but not be polluted, not pollute their own community, that they exist within. Of course, urban stormwater has lots of bathing impacts and tourism issues if it's not routed correctly. And then, of course, aging infrastructure, which we've all talked about a lot today. I don't know if very many of you know Chris Singaliano, say his name right, down in Miami at NOAA. But some of the pollution comes from ourselves. When we get enough density of ourselves at the beach, then we're actually causing our own risk, problem, regardless of how clean the water is when the folks first got in it, because of people naturally shedding bacteria in the water at a level. When you have enough folks, you increase the risk of getting sick for everybody. We have septic tank issues, of course, and going back to that idea of having measurable results. We had a project proposal a few years back that knew there were septic tank problems on the coast and wanted to study that to see how those septic tank problems were impacting the local water bodies. Well, our pushback is, let's fix the septic tanks. Let's go ahead and get that out of this situation. We don't need to study how it's affecting the water body. Let's just get the septic tanks pumped out or them hooked up to the sewer system. In Louisiana, the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation had a great project that went out into the community and did water monitoring and found out that the packaged treatment the small packaged treatment plants at like hotels and businesses actually weren't being permitted properly before they started running them. And so they were able to trace that back to those sources and get the community involved, the DEQ involved, and other partners involved, and get them operating properly and make sure that in the future that those things had been permitted properly before they were allowed to start operating and open their business. It was just a little glitch in the system. And I know it's for pathogen pollution, it's a big issue for future planning of POTWs, just because of decreases in funding for some of those items in federal budgets and state budgets, as well as the growth that's going on the coastline. POTW? Public Operated Treatment Works. Sorry. So, just because of the nature of the Gulf of Mexico and, say, the Mississippi River system, the urban environment is at the end of all the pollution. It receives it all, what some people call it the toilet bowl, right? It's right down to the bottom. But so much of that pollution from up above us ends up in our bays and bayous, and we have to start thinking about, is there ways for the coastal communities to help pay for some of that, more efficiently pay for some of that pollution in the upstream environment before it reaches them, because it may be more cost effective to do that. I know Louisiana has talked about doing that in the past. And we do have, some policy challenges. And for Dave, this is my opinion, and it's not the opinion of EPA. But corn policy is an issue, right? Because we're growing corn for ethanol, where we need corn because we use it in our animal feeding systems. But at the same time, we use an awful lot of nitrogen when we have a corn policy that makes farmers want to grow more corn. So, and not necessarily have the wetland infrastructure and bio-treatment things in place to help treat that that nitrogen as it flows off in the upper watershed. But we all need food, we all need fuel, we need fuel diversity. So we've got to deal with those issues and try to make sure our conservation policies and our agricultural policies, complement each other. And like I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of partnership hope because of groups like Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation and Alabama Water Watch and the estuary programs, who get the community together, they get the right partners together, they monitor the water, they find the pollution source, they get it fixed, and then you see seagrasses blossom. And I did not even know that it was increasing at the rate it is now, which is just amazing. And Alabama Water Watch at Auburn University, and Bill Deutsch, who retired recently, but Bill Deutsch and them were able to certify community water monitors and get them in the community to monitor the water, find out the pollution issues in their environment, in the urban environment, and also take that back to their decision makers to make the right changes to get those pollution problems fixed. And some of our future pollution issues today. So walking around the Capitol, you know, we look around and we're all aging, right? There's a lot of us that have gray hair in the beard. We have a lot of us that have really lovely hair coloring, and that's just the guys that I saw in DC. But we're getting older and we're using more pharmaceuticals, and we're not dealing with that as a country so far. What are those low levels of pharmaceuticals doing in mixtures in the environment, you know, and especially in the urban environment? We have concentrations of people. Metals, we had a project recently for mercury and selenium in fish tissue. And there's a discussion going on within the agency and in the states on what should our recommendations be on consuming fish that have mercury that may have high selenium levels, which may help offset the detrimental effects of mercury. And the Western Pacific Fisheries Council has already put out a poster saying, here's some of the fish that you can eat because they have high selenium. So, of course, aging infrastructure, we talked about that before. In my community after Hurricane Katrina, I saw them out there working on the roadside, taking out the old sewer lines and the old water lines and the old stormwater drainage, and all of them had holes in them. So, you know, we thought our water was brown in our bathtub, you know, and that's okay. It was iron pipe, you know, and stuff like that. But then all the pipes in the same hole had holes in them, so they were all trading pollutants and fresh water. Like we said, is it more efficient for downstream cities to help pay for prevention in the upstream environment? Freshwater inflows becoming more of an issue as the urban populations grow in the coastline and withdrawing more water, especially in places like Texas. And Mississippi River wants to move, so is that going to cause us to have shift in pollution into Atchafalaya? And do we have to start thinking more about that problem more so than the hypoxic zone may shift, right? And of course, sediment isn't always a pollutant. It's something that we need, and we just need it in the right spot. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you.